Hey, this is Blakus. Welcome to my first tutorial video. The purpose of this is to answer a couple of emails that I've got over the last few weeks asking me how I put together my orchestral music. So this video is to just run through my Cubase template very quickly to show you a bit about the libraries that I use in each section of the orchestra and how I put it all together. Down the side here in Cubase, you'll see I've organized folders. That helps. It's an attempt to keep me organized. Strings, brass, woods, percussions, and then rhythm, which is contemporary band instruments, and a few big band kind of things, which I don't use all that often. First of all, I'll just play through the song so you can hear what it sounds like. The piece I'll be using for this video is the Kung Fu Panda theme that I did a mock-up of a week ago. Okay, so it ranges from a nice, quiet, intimate atmosphere to quite a big crescendo at the end there, which really shows off the full textures of my template. Now, let's start with strings. For strings, the library I use the most would definitely be LA Scory strings by Audio Bro. These are fantastic strings, and especially since the update to LAS 2, I've been extremely happy with the sound and the playability of these strings. You'll notice in my template I have, those of you that are familiar with LAS will see that I have a separate MIDI track for each individual desk. My reason for that is so that I can have extra control to record a different performance for each separate desk. If I have the time to, and if I have the time, I always will, because each desk plays, sounds, and responds differently, and I find the way that I play each section on my keyboard with my controllers varies quite differently. And if you compare the MIDI curves, even though these desks are all playing the same melody, you'll find the curves have quite a lot of subtle differences. Purely because of the way that they sound. Now don't get me wrong, I can just select all 4 tracks like this and just do a quick take of first violins all in one go. But I really prefer, like I said, to go in individually and do it 4 times the work, but that extra 10% or 20% maybe if I'm lucky is worth it in my opinion. So let's listen to just the A violins by themselves for a second. Okay, very intimate, delicate sound. I think it's only 4 violins. Correct me if I'm wrong. Anyway, it's just this one desk of violins, and sounds very nice. Let's compare that to the B legato. Very nice sounding again, totally different, and responded a little bit differently to the way that I used my CC controllers, so I played it a little bit differently. And the combination of all this together, you get the idea, adds more realism. I mean, because in an entire, just a violin section, just one section of the string orchestra, I have 4 different performances that all contribute to this beautiful, lush melody. Let's hear all those violins together. You'll notice I haven't actually recorded a first chair in this entire piece actually. So I'm really happy with the tone of Last 2, especially since they introduced the stage in color. Um, I've I've applied the Batman profile, color profile across all sections of my string orchestra. I found it to be a good balance between lush warmth and definition and clarity, and so I've settled on that one for now in my template, but this is constantly changing. The Lord of the Rings is another really nice color profile that I've used before. It's a bit darker though, and has much more sort of reverb and things like that on it. I don't actually use the contact reverb. I'll talk about my reverb a little bit later. All right, let's listen to the whole string section by itself, because I really like the sound of the entire section. I will point out though that I don't actually use LA scoring strings double basses. I always used to, but since I got Albion, I really like the Spitfire Audio Albion's double basses, and I'll solo them here for you just quickly. They are very powerful, but still quite transparent at the same time, and the hall that they were recorded in is just amazing. So here's a small snippet. An extremely powerful sound, and blends very well with Last 2. So listen out for those when we get towards the end of the strings. So yeah, I'm a really big fan of that string sound. I love the flexibility that Last gives with having control over the Divisi sections. I'll be interested to hear your thoughts on what you think about the tone and the sound of those strings as well. So post if something's annoying you about it, or whether you enjoy it too. I'd like to know. Let's move on. Oh, just before I do, you'll notice down the side here, each of my sections has key switches, and I've kept them the same across my whole string section. These key switches just swap between all the different articulations in the strings, so I can seamlessly without much fuss, go to tremolos, trills, staccatos, things like that, just with some key switches. That's been fantastic, because I used to have something like 50 at least, way more actually, tracks purely for strings, but now that's pretty much it for everything, and that's each little section as well. So anyway, enough blabbling. Woodwinds. The core library for woodwinds for me is probably Cine Sample's Holly Woodwinds. In this particular song, I used a patch, which is one of my favorites, and it's an octave patch. And rather than the mod wheel controlling velocity and volume, it actually controls attack, which is quite handy. So have a listen here. I'll solo these out for you. So you could hear the slightly more attack on these notes up the top there as I raised the CC1 attack. Now I love that sound, and it's only a single melody played on the keyboard, but you have a beautifully orchestrated octave woodwind sound coming out. In my opinion, that sounds better than any combination of solos put together, because it's been recorded in the building the way it was meant to be played. Very useful device, used all the time. That's why I use it all the time. In saying that though, I do actually blend VSL solo instruments, just the download edition of the woodwinds with that. You would have heard an oboe towards the start blending with the strings. I'll solo that for you. That's a beautiful sound. And to make it sit, because VSL is usually quite dry, to make it sit, I've used a bit of reverb on there, algorithmic reverb. 2C Audio Breeze is usually my reverb of choice, and it's because it sounds beautiful and it's very light on system resources. And I've got a 2-second scoring stage preset with quite a high mix there to try and push it back into the mix. Now that's about as complex as my reverb setups get, and I use 2C Audio Breeze for all of my reverbs across the whole orchestra actually. I have experimented at some stages with very, very complex setups, and with sample modeling brass, I think that's needed to make it work in an orchestral context, but I won't talk about that in this video. So yeah, I also have solo flute doubling that Holly Woodwinds melody that I played earlier, and I'll play both of those. First of all, the solo flute, and then I'll play it with the octaves from Holly Woodwinds, so you can hear how it just glues it together. Because Holly Woodwinds doesn't actually have legato, sampled legato intervals, just the solo instrument with it just helps it a little bit flow a bit nicer. I'll play them together now. I really like that sound. The other woodwinds in this are Albion woodwinds, which are also fantastic, and that pretty much makes up all of my woodwind collection, and I just use combinations of those three libraries together. Here's the whole woodwind section together towards the end there. Great. Brass. I'm usually a massive brass. What's the word I'll use? I love brass, put it that way. But this piece doesn't actually use that much of it. It's got quite a bit towards the end. Cine samples, cine brass is usually my weapon of choice. All these tracks here are cine samples. And I will usually supplement that with some sample modeling, horns and trumpets as well, if needed. I didn't think it was needed this time since brass really wasn't the feature. But the tone of cine samples is just fantastic. The trombones here are probably one of the weak points of this mock-up. I just found them a bit difficult to program in this case. But here's the brass soloed just towards the end. The horns are actually the Cine Samples Cinebrass Pro 12 horn legato patch. When I first heard that Cine Samples were doing a 12 horn patch, I thought they were on drugs. But they proved me wrong. It's fantastic. I love it. I thought it would be overkill, but I honestly don't think it is. At low dynamics, it's so warm and nice, but in this case I use some of the higher dynamic layers here to make the horns cut through a bit more with some of that nice bite that this patch has. Here it is by itself. Here it is by itself. Yeah, that's pretty big. I like it though. It's really nice. Alright, moving on. I'll do more on brass later. I've got some fantastic brass pieces that really show off Cinebrass. We're up to percussion. Spitfire pretty much preaches everything in this department as far as my template goes. Spitfire percussion. Decatree mics are pretty much all that I use as well. Lighter on resources, but just so easily fits into a mix really nicely. I'll also add in this section when I solo it the Spitfire harp and the Spitfire, this is a new product actually that's just come out, Spitfire Orchestral Grand. I love this library, such a great library if you're looking for a piano to fit into an orchestral mix. Here, I'll solo it for you. And it'll help if I solo the right instrument. Fantastic. All right, here's the whole percussion and harp and piano. Very nice sound in my opinion. I love it. Now that's a bit of a stilted performance. It's obviously not quantized. I never quantize, but in the whole context of things, it sounds quite nice. And I'm often a fan of leaving things a little bit unrestricted like that to make it sound more real. I'm just going to play the climax towards the end with all the instruments. See if you can hear the piano. You can't really hear it that much in in the mix, but it actually does add quite a lot of power. If you're really listening for it, you can hear it. So here's the end. Which reminds me, the choir. Cinesample's Voxos. I love this library. The role it's playing in this piece right now is one of the things it really excels at, is backing up the orchestra harmonically, and it just does such a fantastic job. I've got the basses, tenors, altos and sopranos loaded. Legato connections are beautiful, and I'll solo it for you now. To me, that's really impressive. I love that. So I'll play the whole piece for you again just to finish off. Listen out for the different parts you've heard as we've gone through, and especially see if you can hear the effect that that choir has in really building the intensity towards the end. So that's pretty much all I wanted to cover today. Let me know if you have any questions about my template or anything else at all that I've mentioned today. And I'll be keen to hear your comments as well on whether things you like, things you didn't like. But yeah, I hope you've found it interesting, and until then, I'll see you next time. This is Blakus.